You ever think you've got everything figured out? A successful career, a beautiful wife, two amazing kids. Life feels like it's finally falling into place. But sometimes it takes just one small, innocent moment to knock it all down. For me, that moment came on a lazy Sunday morning. My 7-year-old daughter, Bella, was sitting on my lap, her arms wrapped around my neck like she always does. She smelled like maple syrup and fresh shampoo, her damp hair sticking to my cheek. We were in the middle of breakfast, pancakes sizzling in the kitchen, Annie humming quietly as she moved around, the smell of coffee filling the room. It was one of those mornings where everything feels right, almost perfect. And then Bella's voice, soft and playful, cut through the warmth like a knife. "Daddy, are you a loser?" I froze. For a second, I didn't even process what she said. I blinked down at her, my heart skipping a beat as my mind struggled to catch up. Bella's face was innocent, her big, wide eyes looking at me like she didn't just shatter something deep inside me. She wasn't joking. She wasn't being mean. It was just a question. "Are you a loser?" I swallowed hard, forcing a smile even though my stomach twisted into knots. "What did you say, sweetheart?" She giggled, her small fingers playing with the buttons on my shirt. "Uncle Tom said Mommy's the best thing that ever happened to him. And Mommy said you're a loser." "Are you a loser, Daddy?" The room, once filled with the sounds of a perfect family morning, felt like it went dead silent. My grip on my coffee cup tightened, my pulse quickening in my ears. I couldn't breathe for a second. Bella's words echoed in my mind, sharp and relentless. "Mommy said you're a loser." Annie's humming continued from the kitchen, oblivious to the bomb our daughter had just dropped. I glanced at her, trying to keep my face steady, but inside, my world tilted on its axis. The question that came from Bella's innocent lips, it was more than just a question. It was a crack in the foundation of everything I thought I knew. I used to believe I had it all figured out, working hard to provide for my family, giving them the life I thought they deserved. I'm Nicholas, an architect who made it big early. My days were filled with long hours, designing buildings that scraped the sky, building a life that looked picture perfect from the outside. And Annie, she was the woman everyone envied. Gorgeous, charming, a force of nature. I married her because she lit up my world. We had two beautiful kids, Bella, my little artist, and Sammy, my curious explorer. Everything I worked for, everything I sacrificed for was for them. But now, with Bella's question hanging in the air, it didn't feel like enough. For the first time, I questioned everything. That question from Bella wouldn't leave my head. Even as the morning went on, as we cleaned up breakfast and the kids ran off to play, it kept echoing, louder and louder. "Are you a loser, Daddy?" I wasn't a loser, was I? I had built a life people dream about. I was Nicholas Cole, a successful architect. I had put in the work. Early mornings, late nights, endless hours at the office, designing buildings that would stand long after I was gone. I'd climbed the ladder fast, landed big contracts, and made a name for myself in the industry. By 35, I was the guy everyone looked up to. But building that career had come at a cost. I wasn't blind to it. The long nights at the office, the missed dinners, the family trips where I stayed behind to wrap up just one more project, all of it created a distance I hadn't noticed until now. Annie, my wife, the woman I'd married because she made me feel like anything was possible, had started to feel distant too. Back when we first met, she was this bright, unstoppable force. She had a laugh that could fill an entire room, and a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world that mattered. I remember how she lit up every time I looked at her, how I used to watch her from across the room at parties thinking I was the luckiest man alive. Now, it felt like that light had dimmed. She was still stunning, always dressed in the best, her hair perfectly done, her clothes designer and glamorous, but the warmth was gone. We hadn't been close in a while, not really. We were still a team, but something had shifted. It wasn't like it used to be. She loved the luxury I could provide, vacations in the Hamptons, trips to Europe, 5-star hotels, and the latest fashion. And I was happy to give it to her. I worked hard to make sure she had everything she wanted. But over the years, that spark, that easy intimacy we once had was replaced by something else. A coldness I couldn't quite place. I told myself it was just life, marriage, kids, careers. People grow apart sometimes, right? But now, with Bella's words gnawing at me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd missed something big. Then, there was Tom, my best friend since college. I met Annie through Tom, actually. He was always the life of the party, charismatic, loud, the kind of guy who could walk into a room and immediately own it. Women loved him, men envied him, and somehow he had always been my closest friend. We'd been through everything together, from college all-nighters to celebrating my first big break in architecture. Tom wasn't as successful as me, though. He'd bounced around from job to job, always on the verge of something big, but never quite getting there. He didn't seem to mind, but every now and then I caught that flicker in his eyes, that shadow of envy, like he was watching from the sidelines while I got everything he'd wanted. Still, I brushed it off. We were best friends. I trusted him with my life. Tom had always been close to Annie too, sometimes a little too close if I was honest with myself, but I never thought anything of it. They'd laugh together, share jokes, and sometimes I'd catch them whispering when I wasn't around, but that was just Tom, being Tom. He was always around, helping out with the kids, dropping by unannounced for dinner, being part of the family. It wasn't until now, standing in the aftermath of Bella's question, that I started piecing things together. Little moments I had dismissed. The way Annie smiled at Tom, bright and easy in a way she hadn't smiled at me in a long time. The way she'd giggle at his jokes, her eyes lighting up like they used to when we were first dating. How long had it been since she looked at me like that? How long had I been blind to the closeness between them? The thought made my stomach turn. I wanted to believe that Bella's question was just a child's innocent misunderstanding. But I couldn't ignore the feeling that something deeper was brewing beneath the surface, something that had been there all along while I was too busy building the life I thought we wanted. And now I couldn't help but wonder, had I already lost her to Tom without even realizing it? Bella's words haunted me. Uncle Tom kissed Mommy on the lips, and she called you a loser. I tried to brush it off, told myself she was just a kid, maybe mixing up something she'd seen on TV or overheard. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself, it lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. Annie? Kissing Tom? Calling me a loser? The woman I'd spent my life with, the woman I worked every day for. She wouldn't do that, would she? By the time I tucked Bella into bed that night, her innocent question had cracked something open inside me. I lay awake next to Annie, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece it all together. The room was quiet, the soft hum of the air conditioner filling the space between us. I could hear Annie's even breathing beside me, but it didn't comfort me like it used to. There was distance between us, more than just the physical space. My mind raced back through the years. How many times had Tom come over while I was at work? How many times had I shrugged it off, thinking nothing of it? It wasn't unusual for him to drop by when I wasn't home, just to hang out or help with the kids. He'd been doing it for years. But now, Bella's words made me question everything. The next morning, as we sat in the kitchen, Annie was scrolling through her phone, not paying much attention. I watched her, trying to gauge if there was anything different in her demeanor. She looked the same, calm, composed, beautiful, as always. But something felt off now, something I hadn't noticed before. Or maybe I had noticed, and I'd just been too blind to admit it. I sipped my coffee, heart pounding as I decided to ask the question. Casual, not accusing, just curious. Did Tom stop by yesterday? I asked, keeping my tone light, pretending I wasn't holding my breath for her response. Bella mentioned something about him being here. Annie didn't even look up from her phone. No, he didn't come over. Her response was quick, too quick. I waited for her to say more, to offer an explanation, but she just kept scrolling like it wasn't worth her time. Something flickered in her eyes, though. A momentary hesitation. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it was there. And in that split second, I knew she was lying. My stomach twisted. Why would she lie about something as simple as Tom coming over? There was no reason to hide it, unless there was something more. I forced myself to stay calm, my mind scrambling for answers. Maybe Bella was wrong. Maybe she'd misinterpreted something and Annie was telling the truth. But that brief pause, the shift in her eyes, told me otherwise. I spent the rest of the day at work, but I couldn't focus. I kept replaying Annie's response over and over in my head, dissecting every second of it. The doubt grew stronger with each passing hour. When I got home, I decided to ask Sammy, I didn't want to believe Bella, but I needed more. I had to know if I was being paranoid or if something really was happening behind my back. After dinner, I pulled Sammy aside, making sure my tone stayed light. "Hey buddy, did Uncle Tom come over yesterday?" Bella mentioned he was here. Sammy, always honest and straightforward, nodded without hesitation. "Yeah, Daddy, he was playing with Bella and Mommy in the living room. They were laughing at something." My heart sank. There it was, the confirmation I didn't want. Tom had been over, just like Bella said, and Annie had lied about it. The knot in my stomach tightened. I could feel the weight of the questions pressing down on me, but I wasn't ready to face them yet. The idea that Annie, my wife, my partner, could be cheating on me with my best friend was too much to process all at once. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and there was no going back now. Every smile Annie gave, every time she checked her phone, every mention of Tom, it all started to feel wrong. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to know the truth, even if it destroyed me. The doubt planted by Bella's words had grown into something I couldn't ignore. Every day, I noticed more cracks in the foundation of my life with Annie, cracks I'd once been too blind to see. At first, it was subtle, small things I might have brushed off if I weren't already suspicious. The way Annie seemed to light up when Tom was around, the way she'd lean in a little too close when they talked, the laughter. God, the laughter. She used to laugh like that with me. Now it was reserved for him, like he was the only one who could bring out that side of her. I told myself it was nothing. You're imagining things, I thought. But the more I watched, the more I saw things I couldn't explain away. The secret glances, the way their conversations quieted when I walked into the room. I started catching them in half-whispered exchanges that would end abruptly when I approached. And then there was the touch. Little touches here and there, his hand grazing her arm, her hand on his shoulder. Nothing overt, but enough to make my stomach twist. I'd see it from across the room, the way she'd giggle and look away, her eyes shining in a way they hadn't for me in years. It was like a light switch had been flipped. Suddenly, everything was different. I'd once trusted them both without question, but now every interaction felt like it was hiding something. I started to wonder if maybe it had been there all along, and I just hadn't wanted to see it. The worst part? They didn't even seem to care that I was right there, watching. They were careful, yes, but not careful enough. It was as if they knew I'd never suspect anything. But I did, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had missed something bigger, something more damning. That feeling gnawed at me until I couldn't take it anymore. One night after Annie had fallen asleep, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through her things. I hated myself for it, even as I rifled through her purse, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to find anything. I wanted to prove to myself that I was being paranoid, that my suspicions were unfounded. But then, buried between her wallet and some receipts for groceries, I found it, a hotel receipt. The name of the hotel caught my eye first, some luxury spot downtown. The kind of place Annie loved, but I'd never taken her to. And the date? The date was from a weekend I'd been out of town on business. I'd assumed she'd spent that weekend at home with the kids. That's what she'd told me, at least. But the receipt told a different story. I stared at it for what felt like forever, my hands shaking, my pulse racing. The room felt like it was spinning around me. Annie had stayed at a hotel I hadn't paid for while I was away. There was no reason for her to lie unless she hadn't been alone. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. All the doubts, all the suspicions, they were real. Annie wasn't just pulling away from me. She was with Tom, and they had been doing it right under my nose. From that moment, my world began to unravel. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The image of them together, Annie and Tom, laughing, touching, sharing moments that used to be mine, played in my mind on a constant loop. I could feel myself spiraling, but I couldn't stop. I needed proof. I needed to see it with my own eyes. That's when I did the unthinkable. I installed hidden cameras in the house. I justified it by telling myself I needed answers. I couldn't confront her without proof. She'd deny it, twist the truth, make me doubt what I knew in my gut. I had to be sure. The cameras were discreet, placed in corners of the living room, the kitchen, the bedroom, places they thought they were safe. At first, nothing. Days passed and life seemed normal. Annie cooked dinner, played with the kids, went about her routine like nothing had changed. Tom came over as usual, but everything seemed innocent. My doubts began to creep back in. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was losing my mind, seeing things that weren't there. But then, on the fourth night, the footage told a different story. I was sitting at my desk, scrolling through the day's footage when it happened. Tom had come over in the afternoon, as he often did. At first, it seemed harmless, just them talking in the kitchen. But then, I saw it. He leaned in, his hand brushing her hair aside, and kissed her neck. She didn't pull away. My heart stopped. I rewound the footage, watching it again, hoping I'd misseen it. But no. There it was, clear as day. Tom's lips on her neck, his hands on her waist, and Annie not pulling away, not resisting, just letting it happen. Her eyes fluttered shut, her lips parted. The world seemed to blur around me, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the mouse. But I kept watching, my stomach churning as they moved closer. The kiss turned into something more. The touches became urgent, desperate. They moved toward the counter, their bodies pressed together, the sounds of their laughter turning into something darker. And then, there it was. They made love in my kitchen. The same kitchen where we shared family dinners, where our kids played, where I thought my life was safe. I watched in a daze as they finished, as they whispered to each other, laughing like nothing was wrong, like they hadn't just torn my world apart. I sat there, staring at the screen, the footage still playing in the background, but I couldn't hear it anymore. All I could feel was the hollowness inside me. Everything I thought I knew, my marriage, my family, my best friend, had been a lie. And now, I had the proof. But it wasn't relief I felt. It wasn't satisfaction. It was something much worse. I felt empty. The images of Annie and Tom in my kitchen wouldn't leave my mind. I had watched them over and over, thinking each time that maybe it would feel less real, that maybe the ache in my chest would dull. But it didn't. It only got worse. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. Every time I looked at Annie, I felt sick, like the words would bubble up and spill out of me, rage, disgust, betrayal. But I held them down. I wasn't ready. I needed to understand. How long had this been going on? How deep did the lies run? Was my entire marriage, my life, just a carefully constructed illusion? The more I thought about it, the more I questioned everything. Every memory, every laugh, every kiss between us suddenly felt tainted. How many moments had I thought were mine, only to realize they belonged to someone else? I felt like I was living in a nightmare where nothing made sense, but the pain was too real to ignore. And then the worst thought crept in. The kids. Bella and Sammy. My heart, my joy. Could they be part of the lie too? Could Annie have lied about that too? At first, I pushed the thought away, horrified that my mind would even go there. Bella and Sammy were mine. I had been there for their births, held them when they were only minutes old. They looked like me, didn't they? But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew faster than I could stop it. Tom had been in our lives for years. He had been around before Bella was even born. Could Annie and Tom have been seeing each other this whole time? Could they have been together when I thought I was building a family? I couldn't take it. The thought gnawed at me relentlessly until I couldn't think about anything else. I needed to know. I needed to be sure. I made the decision in the middle of the night, lying awake next to Annie while she slept soundly, unaware of the storm inside me. I slipped out of bed and into the bathroom, my hands trembling as I searched for my phone. I Googled the nearest lab that could do a DNA test. It was terrifying to even consider it, but I had to know the truth. 3 days. That's how long it would take for the results. I told myself I could handle whatever the truth was as long as I knew. But those 3 days were the longest of my life. I went through the motions, pretending everything was normal, pretending I wasn't falling apart on the inside. Annie didn't notice anything was off. Her mind was elsewhere, probably on Tom. She spent more time on her phone than talking to me, and every time I looked at her, all I could see was her with him. Finally, the day came. I drove to the lab, my hands cold and clammy as I picked up the envelope. I couldn't open it there. I couldn't bear to know the truth in front of strangers. So I took it to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and stared at it for what felt like hours. My heart pounded in my chest, my fingers shaking as I tore it open. I scanned the results, my breath catching in my throat. Bella? Not mine. Sammy. not mine. The words blurred in front of me, but the message was clear. They weren't mine, they were Tom's. I felt the world tilt around me, my vision going black for a moment. The air was sucked out of my lungs and I could barely breathe. It felt like I was suffocating under the weight of the truth. Everything I had believed, everything I had built my life around, my wife, my children, my family, none of it was real. I don't remember driving home. I don't remember parking the car or walking through the front door. All I remember is the crushing weight of it all. Like someone had taken my entire world and smashed it into a million pieces, leaving me to pick up the broken shards. The house was empty when I got there. The kids were at school, and Annie was out, probably with Tom. I stood in the living room, the same room where we'd celebrated birthdays, opened Christmas presents, played games as a family. It felt like a mockery now, like every happy memory had been stolen from me, ripped away by their betrayal. I collapsed onto the couch, my hands and my hair shaking with a mix of anger and grief. How could she do this? How could she lie to me about something so fundamental, so sacred? I had given her everything, my time, my love, my life, and she had repaid me with this. The kids, they weren't mine. I wasn't their father. The pain was unlike anything I'd ever felt. It wasn't just losing a wife. It was losing the very thing that gave my life meaning, my role as their father. And now, even that was a lie. The rage came next. Hot, blinding rage that surged through me, leaving me trembling with fury. I wanted to scream, to tear the house apart, to confront her and Tom and make them pay for what they'd done. But I didn't. Something stopped me. It wasn't just rage anymore. It was something colder, something sharper. Revenge. They thought they had won. They thought they had taken everything from me, but they didn't know what was coming. I wasn't just going to confront them. I wasn't going to shout or cry or beg for an explanation. No, I was going to take everything from them, piece by piece, just like they had done to me. This wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. They were going to regret ever crossing me. There was no sudden explosion of rage, no dramatic confrontation. Instead, the betrayal settled into something colder, something sharper, like ice running through my veins. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of a messy outburst. That would be too easy for Annie and Tom. They wouldn't get off that easily. I would strip them of everything, piece by piece, the same way they had done me. The first step was securing my assets. Over the years, I had built solid financial foundation for my family, or so I thought. Annie had access to everything. Our joint accounts, credit cards, and even some of the investment portfolios. She loved the finer things in life, and I had always made sure she could have them. Not anymore. While Annie carried on with her life if nothing was wrong, I began quietly shifting money out of our joint accounts. I made sure to move it into places she couldn't reach, offshore accounts, new investments she had no access to. Every transfer was discreet, every withdrawal calculated. I was careful not to raise any suspicion. As far as she knew, I was still the same husband and quietly going about my day while she carried on her affair. Next, I canceled her credit cards, one by one. I didn't do it all at once. I staggered the cancellations, making it seem like an error at the bank, just a small inconvenience. She complained about it, of course, but I feigned ignorance, promising to look into it. All the while, I watched as her financial lifelines slowly disappeared. Annie loved to spend. She thrived on it. Designer clothes, luxury vacations, fine dining. Now, those luxuries would be slipping through her fingers and she wouldn't even know why. But this was just the beginning. I waited until everything was in place, until I had control of the money, the house, everything Annie depended on. Then I made my move. It was a quiet evening. The kids were asleep, and Annie was sitting in the living room, scrolling through her phone like always. I stood there for a moment, watching her, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. There was no going back after this, but I didn't care. They had taken everything from me. Now, it was my turn. I walked into the room and dropped the DNA test results on the coffee table in front of her. She looked up, her brow furrowing in confusion, before picking up the envelope. "What's this?" she asked, her voice casual, completely unaware of the storm brewing. "Open it," I said, my voice steady. Cold. Annie hesitated for a moment before tearing open the envelope. She pulled out the papers, her eyes scanning the results. I watched her face closely, waiting for the reaction. Anger, fear, guilt. But none of that came. Instead, a small smirk tugged at the corner of her lips. She set the papers down, leaning back into the couch with a casual shrug. So, it took you this long to figure it out? Her voice was dismissive, almost bored, as if I had just asked her about the weather. I felt my pulse quicken, but I kept my composure. How long, Annie? How long have you and Tom been doing this? Her eyes met mine, cool and indifferent. Years, she said bluntly, since before Bella was born. My stomach twisted, but I didn't flinch. And you lied to me. You let me believe they were mine. Her gaze didn't waver. It was easier that way. You were a good provider, Nicholas. You gave us the life we wanted. But you and I, we were never real. You were just the convenient option. Her words cut deeper than I expected, but it wasn't the pain that consumed me anymore. It was the rage, the cold, calculating rage that had been building since the moment I found out. I had given her everything, my love, my trust, my life, and she had thrown it all away like it was nothing. I never loved you, she added with a sigh, as if she was explaining something trivial. Not the way you thought, Tom. He's the one who really understands me. I stared at her, feeling the final thread of whatever connection we once had snap. She didn't care. She never had. But she would. Once I knew Annie had no remorse, no guilt for what she had done, I set the next phase of my plan in motion. I didn't scream at her, didn't throw her out of the house. That would have been too easy. No, I wanted her to feel the consequences of her actions. First, I gathered the footage from the hidden cameras. Every stolen kiss, every whisper, every touch between her and Tom, it was all there, recorded in crystal clear detail. I backed it up, made copies, and prepared to release it where it would hurt the most. I started with her parents. They had always seen Annie as the perfect daughter, the doting wife, the loving mother. I sent the footage to them anonymously, along with a short note explaining that their daughter wasn't who they thought she was. Then I sent it to a few close friends, people who had admired our family from the outside, who had believed in the illusion we had created. I wanted them to see the truth, to see who Annie really was. But I wasn't done. I posted a cryptic message on my social media, something subtle, just enough to spark curiosity, a hint at betrayal and secrets coming to light. The comments started pouring in, people asking questions, speculating about what was going on, and then at just the right moment, I released the full video. The fallout was immediate. Annie's friends and family were horrified. The woman they thought they knew was exposed, her image shattered in an instant. The comments came flooding in, condemnations, disgust, pity. People who had once looked up to her now turned their backs, unable to believe what they were seeing. Annie tried to reach me, of course. The calls came in, angry at first, then pleading, but I didn't answer. I didn't care what she had to say. She had made her choices. Now, she had to live with the consequences. As for Tom, he stayed quiet. No apologies, no explanations, just silence. But that didn't matter. I had something special planned for him, too. They thought they had taken everything from me. But in the end, I was the one who held the power, and I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. I had waited for this moment, planned it, replayed it in my mind 1,000 times. It was the final piece in my puzzle of revenge, the one that would bring it all crashing down on Tom, the man I once called my best friend, the man who had taken everything from me. The office was quiet when I walked in. The receptionist gave me a confused look, but I didn't stop to explain myself. I marched down the hallway, my heart pounding, but my face calm. I had prepared for this. I was ready. Tom's door was slightly ajar, his name etched in silver on the plaque. I pushed it open without knocking. He was sitting behind his desk, flipping through some paperwork, completely unaware of the storm about to hit him. When he looked up and saw me, his expression didn't change. There was no surprise, no guilt, just that same smugness I had grown to despise. He leaned back in his chair, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Well, if it isn't Nicholas, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. What brings you here? I closed the door behind me, not breaking eye contact. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I let the silence fill the room, watching as his smirk faltered just slightly. He thought he had won. He thought this was over. He had no idea what was coming. I think you know why I'm here, I finally said, my voice calm, controlled. Tom leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk, his eyes narrowing slightly. If this is about Annie, I'm sure you've already figured it out by now. He waved his hand dismissively. It wasn't personal, Nick. It was just inevitable. I felt a surge of anger at his casual tone, but I didn't let it show. Inevitable? I repeated, taking a step closer to the desk. You mean betraying your best friend, lying to me for years and screwing my wife? Tom's smile widened. He shrugged, as if it was all just a game. What can I say? You had everything, Nick. The career, the money, the family. You came into my world, stole Annie away back, and built the life I should have had. His words hung in the air, the bitterness beneath them finally surfacing. It wasn't just about Annie. It was never just about her. This was about him, his jealousy, his resentment, his inferiority complex that had been festering for years. I loved Annie first, Tom continued, his voice darker now, more venomous. She was mine, and you took her. So yeah, I wanted her back, and I got her. While you were off playing the perfect husband, I was the one who gave her what she needed. I stood there, absorbing every word, but I didn't flinch. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment where the truth finally came out, and I saw him for what he really was. Not my best friend, not even a man, just a small, insecure boy who never got over losing the girl. I didn't steal Annie, I said, my voice cold and measured. You lost her because she chose me, and now you've thrown your life away for nothing. Tom's smug expression faltered for a brief second, but he quickly regained it. Nothing? I got Annie, Nick. I've had her for years. You were just a placeholder. I let out a small, bitter laugh. Had her? You think you have her now? Tom's eyes narrowed again. What are you talking about? I stepped closer, leaning over the desk, my voice low and steady. You really don't get it, do you? This isn't about Annie anymore. This is about you, Tom. You've been living in my shadow for years, jealous of everything I've accomplished, waiting for your moment to strike, and you think you've won because you slept with my wife. I paused, letting the silence build. But I've already taken something much more important from you. Tom's brow furrowed in confusion. What the hell are you talking about? I smiled then, a slow, satisfied smile. Your career, your reputation, it's all crumbling beneath you, and you don't even know it. He scoffed, leaning back in his chair, trying to maintain his composure. You're bluffing. No, I said softly. I'm not. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a file, tossing it onto his desk. Tom stared at it, not moving. Open it. Reluctantly, he picked up the file, flipping it open. His face shifted as he scanned the contents. Emails, financial records, a carefully fabricated trail of evidence that painted him as a dishonest, unethical employee. I sent that to your boss last week, I said, watching his face closely. It's all there. The accusations, the evidence of misconduct. You've been using company time and resources for personal matters, haven't you? Affairs, expensive trips, shady transactions. Tom's eyes widened, the color draining from his face. This isn't real, he muttered, his voice shaking. It's real enough to launch an investigation, I said, my voice calm, almost casual. And in a company like this, even the suspicion of unethical behavior is enough to destroy you. He stood up, his hands shaking, his once confident demeanor unraveling. You can't do this to me. You think you've won? I can fix this. I shook my head. No, you can't. Your career's over, Tom. You'll be lucky if you walk away without a lawsuit. The panic in his eyes was unmistakable now. The smug, arrogant man I had walked into face was gone, replaced by someone desperate and terrified. He had no control anymore. I had taken that from him. And this, I continued, is just the beginning. I'm going to make sure you lose everything. Your career, your reputation, your standing in this city. You took my family from me, Tom. Now I'm taking your life apart, piece by piece. Tom stared at me, his chest rising and falling as he tried to process what was happening. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The reality of it all had hit him hard. I turned to leave, but before I walked out the door, I looked back at him one last time. I told you, I said quietly. This isn't over. I'm just getting started. And with that, I left him standing there, the weight of his downfall pressing down on him like the very shadow he had tried so hard to escape. The house was eerily quiet. It felt colder now, emptier. The sound of Bella and Samy's laughter was gone, the usual clatter of their toys no longer filling the rooms. Even Annie's footsteps, once a constant presence, had vanished. She had packed her things and left, taking the kids with her, without so much as a word. It didn't surprise me. After the confrontation, after everything had come crashing down, I knew it was only a matter of time before she ran. Annie wasn't the kind of woman who stayed to face the consequences. She had always been about self-preservation, about getting what she wanted. And now that her perfect little world had been shattered, she'd rather escape than face the wreckage. There was no note, no explanation, just an empty house and the silence that followed. I stood in the living room, staring at the vacant space where our family pictures once hung. The house that had once been full of life now felt like a hollow shell, a reminder of everything that had been lost. The funny thing was, I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel closure. All I felt was emptiness. I should have felt something, shouldn't I? Anger, sadness, grief, anything. But there was nothing. No tears, no shouting, just a quiet, gnawing hollowness that settled deep in my chest. I walked through the house, room by room, trying to piece together what had gone wrong. The kids' rooms were untouched, their toys still scattered across the floor. Samey's little science kit, half-finished experiments sitting on the desk, Bella's art supplies, her latest drawing taped to the wall. None of it was mine. None of it belonged to me. Not really. Annie's things were gone. Her closet was empty, her shoes and bags missing from their usual spots. She had taken everything that mattered to her and left behind the rest. I wasn't surprised. She'd made it clear she had never really loved me. She had used me, just like she had used Tom, just like she'd used everyone in her life. I should have seen it sooner. But even with her gone, even with the truth out in the open, there was no satisfaction, no sense of victory. The house, once a symbol of everything I'd worked for, was just cold, empty. The walls felt too big, the silence too loud. I had won, hadn't I? I sat down on the couch, staring at the empty space in front of me. My mind raced, replaying every moment, every lie, every betrayal. Annie's coldness, Tom's smugness, the years I had spent building this life for them, for our family. For what? All this time, I had been so obsessed with giving them the perfect life, the house, the money, the security, that I had ignored the cracks in our marriage. I had been so consumed with being the perfect provider, the perfect husband, that I hadn't seen what was happening right under my nose. Maybe if I had been more present, maybe if I had noticed the distance growing between us, things would have been different. Maybe I could have saved my marriage. Maybe I could have been a better father. But it was too late for that now. The truth was I had lost everything. My wife, my kids, my best friend, they were all gone. But what hurt the most was realizing that I had been living a lie for so long, that I had allowed myself to believe in a life that didn't exist. But even in the emptiness, even in the wreckage of it all, something stirred inside me. A new kind of resolve. This wasn't the end for me. It wasn't over. I'd been living for them for so long, trying to be the man they wanted, trying to fulfill their expectations. But now, with everything laid bare, I could see clearly. I wasn't doing this for them anymore. This was for me. I would rebuild, but not for Annie, not for the kids, not even for Tom. This time, it was for me. I was going to take everything I had learned from this, everything I had lost, and build something new, something that couldn't be taken away, something that they would never understand. I stood up, my gaze drifting out the window. The sun was setting, casting a long shadow over the driveway, the same driveway where I had watched Annie drive away for the last time. The same driveway where Tom had once parked his car without a second thought. They thought they had won. Annie thought she could run, and Tom thought he could take my life from me, but they didn't understand. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I still had more in store for them. They hadn't even begun to pay for what they had done. I knew it would take time, but I was patient. I had all the time in the world. They would come crawling back, Annie, Tom, both of them. They thought they had escaped, but they had no idea what was waiting for them. No idea how far I was willing to go to make them feel the same emptiness, the same betrayal, the same nothingness that I had felt. I had taken Tom's career. I had ruined Annie's reputation. But that was just the beginning. A cold smile tugged at my lips as I walked away from the window. I wasn't done with them yet, not even close.